In 1503, Pope Alexander VI died after attending a Vatican banquet. His body reportedly turned black within hours. His face swelled beyond recognition. Contemporary witnesses said he looked like a demon. His son Cesare, who ate at the same table, survived. According to the accounts, by climbing inside a freshly killed horse and submerging himself in an ice bath. This is either the most dramatic poisoning in history, or it never happened at all. And that distinction matters more than you think.
In the 15th century, Rome was the most dangerous city in Europe. Not because of war, not because of plague, but because of ambition. The papacy was the most powerful office on earth, more powerful than any king, any emperor, any army. It controlled territories, collected taxes, excommunicated monarchs, and decided who went to heaven. And powerful men did not wait for God to decide who held it. They bought it. They poisoned for it. They killed for it. Into this world, in 1455, stepped the first Borgia pope, Alfonso de Borja, a Spanish cardinal who had spent decades accumulating favors, alliances, and influence in the church. He became Pope Calixtus III and immediately did what Renaissance popes did. He used the position to enrich his family. His nephew Rodrigo was made cardinal at the age of 25, without having done anything to deserve it except being born into the right family. Rodrigo Borgia spent the next 37 years as cardinal learning everything there was to know about Vatican power. He accumulated vast wealth. He had at least 4 illegitimate children. He was reprimanded by a pope for hosting a party so scandalous that the official complaint described it as beyond all decency. None of this prevented him from becoming Pope Alexander VI in 1492. Because in Renaissance Rome, none of it was disqualifying. It was simply the cost of doing business. When Alexander VI became pope, he brought his family with him. His son Cesare was made cardinal at 17, a position he despised and would later abandon for military command. His son Giovanni was given command of the papal armies. His daughter Lucrezia was married off at 13 to Giovanni Sforza, Lord of Pesaro, to cement an alliance with Milan. She had no say in the matter. She rarely did. Around them, a court that ran on fear, money, and rumor. And the rumors about the Borgias were extraordinary. Poisoning, incest, murder for hire, a secret substance called cantarella, described as white, sweet-tasting, and completely undetectable. The question historians have argued about for 5 centuries is simple. How much of it was true? Start with what is documented. Pope Alexander VI had a well-established practice of selling church offices, cardinalships, bishoprics, pardons, to the highest bidder. This was simony, and it was technically illegal under church law. Alexander did it openly and repeatedly. When cardinals died, their estates reverted to the papacy. When wealthy men wanted church protection, they paid for it. The Vatican treasury under Alexander grew enormously, and his enemies noted, with some regularity, that the men whose deaths were most financially convenient for the Borgias seemed to die at convenient times. Cardinal Orsini died in January 1503. He had been arrested by the Borgias the previous year and had conveniently died in custody. His death freed up valuable church offices for immediate resale. His family claimed his mother had attempted to buy his release by gifting Alexander a stunning pearl. Alexander accepted the pearl. Orsini died anyway. Then there was Alfonso of Aragon, Lucrezia's second husband, the Duke of Bisceglie. In July 1500, he was stabbed multiple times on the steps of St. Peter's. He survived. He was taken inside to recover. A month later, while still bedridden and healing, he was strangled in his own room by one of Cesare's men. The official reason given was that Alfonso had attempted to kill Cesare first. No evidence of this was ever produced. What had changed in the month between the stabbing and the strangling was that Cesare needed a French alliance, and Lucrezia's marriage to a Neapolitan duke was now an obstacle. Cesare's methods were rarely subtle. In 1499 alone, he ordered the assassination of the Spanish constable of the guard, the Captain Juan Cervillon, and Ferdinando d'Almeida, the Bishop of Ceuta. Contemporary chroniclers reported that in Rome during Cesare's peak power, bodies of murdered men were pulled from the Tiber every single day. He also had 3 of his own senior military commanders strangled at a dinner in Senigallia after correctly suspecting them of plotting against him. He invited them to dinner. He had them killed at the table. Machiavelli, who was present, described it as a masterpiece of statecraft.
And the poison? The cantarella. The sweet white powder that could be dissolved in wine, worked into the pages of books, sewn into the fabric of gloves? Here the historical record becomes murkier. The poison clearly existed in some form. What is disputed is how systematically it was used, and whether the more elaborate methods, the books, the gloves, the rings, were real tools or invented by the people who hated the Borgias most.
Here is the problem with the Borgia legend. Most of the worst stories come from sources with clear reasons to lie. The incest accusations, that Alexander VI and Cesare had sexual relations with Lucrezia, originated almost entirely with Giovanni Sforza, Lucrezia's first husband, after she divorced him. Giovanni had agreed, under papal pressure, to sign a statement declaring himself impotent. It was the only way to get the annulment. A man who had just been publicly declared impotent by the Pope had very strong reasons to say the worst possible things about his ex-wife's family. The Banquet of Chestnuts. Allegedly the most depraved event in Vatican history, involving 50 prostitutes and the Pope himself, comes from the diary of Johann Burchard, the Vatican's master of ceremonies. Burchard was a meticulous record keeper and a loyal servant to Alexander. He was also retained and promoted by Alexander's successors, men who had every reason to document the previous pope's depravity. Historians note that the banquet entry is unusually detailed compared to Burchard's normally dry administrative notes, as if it had been written or embellished for an audience. And Cesare's famous preference for poison? Modern historians consistently point out that his documented victims died of stabbing, strangling, and battlefield wounds. Cesare used direct violence. He was ruthless, brutal, and completely uninterested in hiding it. The man who Machiavelli held up as the ideal Renaissance prince didn't need to be subtle. He was the son of the Pope. Subtlety was for people who didn't have that kind of protection.
Here's the question no one asks about the Borgias. Not, did they poison people, but who decided they were the worst family in Renaissance Italy? Because the Medici bribed their way to power. The Sforza were equally ruthless. The Malatesta of Rimini kept the embalmed bodies of their enemies seated around a banquet table. But only one family name became a synonym for evil, and that didn't happen by accident.
The Borgias had enemies. Powerful, well-connected, literate enemies who outlived them. The Della Rovere family, who became Pope Julius II after Alexander, had spent years as the Borgias' most bitter opponents. Julius II reportedly called Alexander's papacy a disgrace to the Church. He had every reason to ensure that history agreed with him. The campaign began almost immediately after Alexander's death. Chronicles were written, letters were circulated. Stories that had been whispered in private suddenly appeared in writing with specificity and detail. The Banquet of Chestnuts was documented. The hollow poison ring was described. The incest accusations were repeated as established fact. By the 16th century, the Borgias had become useful. Every faction that wanted to criticize the papacy had the Borgias as a ready example. Protestant reformers used them as proof of Catholic corruption. Italian nationalists used them as proof of Spanish decadence. Writers used them as proof that power corrupts absolutely. Each retelling added new details. The poison became more exotic, the crimes more elaborate. By the time Victor Hugo wrote his play about Lucrezia in 1833, the historical woman had been almost completely replaced by a fictional one who suited the story better. And the irony, the darkest irony of the entire story, is that the Borgias were allegedly masters of reputation management. They used rumor and fear as political weapons. They understood that what people believed about you mattered as much as what you actually did. And yet the family that understood this better than almost anyone was ultimately destroyed by exactly the same weapon, used against them by people who had learned it from watching them. Pope Alexander VI died on August 18, 1503. The cause was most likely malaria, Rome's summer plague. The same fever that killed thousands of Romans every year. Not a dramatic poisoning, not a conspiracy. A mosquito. Two of his successors, Sixtus V and Urban VIII, later described him as one of the most capable popes since St. Peter. That assessment rarely appears in the popular accounts. Cesare survived the same illness that killed his father. But without papal protection, his allies abandoned him immediately. Within months, he was stripped of his titles and imprisoned. He escaped. He fled to Navarre. 4 years after his father's death, he was killed in an ambush near Viana Castle, charging alone into enemy lines after his horse was killed. Not by poison, not by conspiracy, not by a rival family's scheming. By a lance in an open field, outnumbered and alone. He was 31 years old. And Lucrezia lived for 16 more years. In Ferrara, as Duchess d'Este, she governed effectively during her husband's frequent absences at war. She became a celebrated patron of the arts, corresponded with poets and scholars, and was genuinely beloved by the people of Ferrara. She died in 1519. 10 days after a difficult childbirth. She was 39 years old. The court mourned her. The legend continued without her.
The Borgias poisoned people, that much seems clear. So did everyone else in Renaissance Rome. What made them different wasn't the depth of their crimes, it was the story that survived them. 5 centuries later, their name is still synonymous with evil, while the families who destroyed them are footnotes. In the game of power, the most dangerous weapon was never the poison. It was the pen.